This video will attempt to show you some tips that we learned while working on the BF100 10 horsepower Honda motor. It's a 1983 model. It was bought brand new and is a one-owner motor bought in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. Problems began when the water quit coming out of its discharge port, and evidently the motor then overheated. Okay, we've got a BF100 Honda 10 horsepower outboard here. We've got it pretty well taken apart, and there's videos out there on what we're doing. Came back from a boating trip and the oil had turned to foam. That's it in the pan down there. We've got it all taken apart. There were a few tricks to taking it apart. Everything is explained online about taking this engine apart to the point we've done it. But what I want to give you is a few tips in taking it apart that we discovered that will help you immensely. What we're trying to do here is cure a problem of the oil cover leaking, which is partially caused because of a bad impeller and the engine getting warm. But let's start at the beginning. This is not a complete how-to disassemble video. There are other videos out there that explain that. What I'm going to try to show you are some details that weren't covered or weren't covered in enough depth, and I think these will help you out. To find out why the water quit coming out of the motor's discharge port, there were three things we decided need looking at. One was the thermostat, another was the water pickup area, and lastly, the impeller. We'd start with the thermostat housing, and first you need to move the carburetor assembly out of the way. You can do this by simply loosening a couple of bolts. You don't have to disconnect all the linkage. To understand the system and how it works, you need to understand the path of the water, and I'll show you where it comes in and goes out through the thermostat housing. The thermostat was taken out and heated in water and opened and closed to the correct opening size per the temperature as mentioned in the shop manual. The lower bolts on the thermostat housing were corroded, and care needs to be used in removing them. In a video we had watched, the individual spoke about how the water inlet could be clogged and that you could clean it simply by taking a small sharp instrument and opening up the port. Well, we checked ours and it was open, but what we found was our water outlet had indeed been clogged, and we cleaned that out. Now with the thermostat checked good and the water outlet clean, we figured we had the motor fixed. Well, that could have cured the problem, but for us it didn't. So we have to go and take the lower unit off and check out the impeller. Be sure to disconnect the shift linkage at the top of the motor. Be sure not to drop the pin or the cotter pin down the lower unit when doing this. We go online, buy and install an impeller. Instead of working, our oil quickly became contaminated with water, and we had to now disassemble to find out what's going wrong. Well, again, a YouTube video mentioned the plastic oil fill cover as being susceptible to warpage, causing the cooling water to mix with the oil. Yes, it is a poor design. The black plastic and yellow cap constitutes this area, and to remove it you have to pull the motor out. Another case of bad engineering. This will expose your oil filtration system, which had self-destructed who knows when, and allow you to understand how a little warpage of this plastic can cause the water to enter the oil. We've laid out many of the parts, pushed the bolts into serial containers so that we know where they are when we put the unit back together. As I say, there were multiple problems, beginning with a bad impeller. The impeller was virtually disintegrated. You can see the parts that we fished out of the motor passageways in the cool-whip container. Okay, the oil cover, which comes off the side of the engine, if you've watched the other videos, you know you have to remove the power head from the case of the outboard to get this piece off. So if you're getting water into your oil, you have to remove the power head to get down to this. Now, you look online for this part, along with the O-ring type of gasket that goes inside the groove here, and you'll find there's a little problem. What we're going to try to do is show you a way to possibly fix this. What I've done here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a piece of radio antenna. Yeah, that's a piece of tubing off of a radio antenna. I'm going to put that into the passageway here, slide it in there to give more of a purchase point for the silicone to go around here, because that's the contamination point right around that hole. So we'll slide the tube through this, and it'll come out here and go into the engine a ways, and it'll give a larger purchase area for silicone to fit there and here where the pipe goes in here. Now this ring is available as well, but we're going to try to put a sufficient amount of silicone around here to seal this. The problem with this is it warps. They made an upgraded one out of aluminum, but try finding it. So this is plastic. It's slightly warped. Began to leak water here. This chamber is filled with oil. The oil main chamber is down here, but you can see it's an open passageway here. This is the oil pickup right here. It starts out life with this around it, coming off the base of the engine right here like this. This is very difficult to get off, and for the most part it serves no purpose. We're going to leave that off. You can buy an oil filter online possibly, but as you can see here, this is the screen on it. The screen has failed, probably had failed long ago, and showed up in the oil as fine little brass pieces, because that's what it is. It's a brass type screen. So it's basically been running without an oil filter for some time. We're going to wrap a piece of mesh screen, probably not as fine as that, around this and wire it on. We're going to do away with this altogether. It's no longer available. They wanted $13 for a piece of plastic webbing, but it's no good anyway and served no purpose. So we're going to wrap and wire this piece of screen on here. We're going to use silicone in conjunction with this ring gasket and a piece of pipe running through the water hose here into the side of the engine, so that there's a good layer of silicone around here so you don't get contamination between the incoming water here through this hose into this bay of oil, which goes to the oil pan down here below. Okay, those are the two things we're going to do. We're going to try to fix that oil cover. We're going to try to fix the oil filter. And lastly, there's one other thing I want to show you. To get this motor off the lower oil pan, what any videos I've watched have not shown is it's very difficult, if it's been on here for many years, to knock this thing up and loose. So what I did, on one of these exhaust bolts here, this is your exhaust tube here, you can reach up through with a rod and this is steel, and tap it with a ball peen hammer at this end here, and tap it fairly significantly, and you can get it to pop free. Tapping it up here on the sides of the motor with a wood block and so forth didn't work. So steel rod, come up through the bottom, tap it right on the head of one of the bolts down here that you can get at on the exhaust pipe. Tap it fairly significantly, and it should jar this loose. We're going to make a gasket for this. We're going to use black silicone on that, or any type of silicone or gasket material type RTV that you want to use on that. We're going to let it set up for a number of days, and we'll go test it. And I'll post you down the road as well in the description as to how well it's holding up. I'll let you know right away during the course of this video if it works or not. We had replaced the impeller originally and took it out for a test cruise and got back to shore, and all of a sudden it started puking out that white oil mixed water. And so it hadn't run for long, but it sure foams up quick and makes a mess. So we're out to cure 3 different things: oil filter, oil cover, get rid of this, and I've showed you how to strike the bottom of the exhaust manifold here to get the power head off of the base unit. So we'll begin to reassemble it now, and that is what I wanted to show you. Again, the carburetor can stay on the outdoor unit out there. You saw that, it was just hanging there. These wires have to be disconnected, and you have to, they're color coded, and you should be able to get those back together okay. You've got vent line, oil line, water line here that go on to the 3 tubes on this. Just watch what you're doing. I have the coil currently off the motor, but you didn't have to take the coil off. And there's nuts, just loose nuts that go in here, and you'll easily drop those or lose those if you don't know what you're doing. I've left them off for the purpose of showing you the oil chamber here, and so that the spark plug wires and so forth are not in the way. But that does not have to come off to take this unit off of the lower unit. So we'll get her together and tell you how she works out. Okay, we've siliconed everything. It may not be pretty, but there's the tube sticking out right there. We've even put a little piece of nylon tubing on it to create a greater shelf inside there, because the hole it's going into is bigger than that tube, and we've got silicone all around it. So there's what we've got. You can see the shiny brass tube going in there. So we're going to go install it. We've wired the oil filter screen onto it. I think it looks pretty good. It's a lot better than it was. It was nothing before. And this is what will mount to the motor now. We removed all the old screen and put a little bit wider mesh on there, but it's a whole lot better than what it was, and it'll help in a catastrophic failure, which you probably won't need any help for anyway. Okay, the coil's been installed. The oil cover's been installed. The breather hoses have been put back on. The oil filter has been installed, and this has all been cleaned off with alcohol, as well as the base unit of the motor. Grease has been put on the splines here. We're ready to mount this unit back on the lower unit. We've got a gasket that will impregnate with silicone. I'll show you that. A gasket's been cut. It's not a work of art, but we're going to put this back together. I'm going to smear black silicone on each side of this, and then this is going to be the base gasket for the top end you saw on the bench. So take a little time. It came off in 2 pieces, the other gasket, and we simply drew a pattern for this. Cut it out. It's Nice to have a hole punch of certain sizes for all but the two large holes. We're done with a punch. Okay, we've smeared silicone on the one side. We're going to place it on the engine and smear silicone on the other side. Okay, you can see that the gasket is in place in silicone. We're ready to put the motor on the base. You're real good, you're real good. You're on this dowel pin. You see anything on that side? There, you're on it.
Yeah, this is pinching on the coil.
Okay, that's it. We're going to bolt it together. Okay, we're a good way there. Putting it back together, we have to put the lower portion on it now. Got the exhaust rubber on there. Got all the bolts up inside there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's not important. You can see that on other videos. But we do have all the wiring knitted back together up front. And we're ready to put the lower unit on. For the shift linkage, we're going to use a little clip rather than the cotter pin. It'll make life a lot easier for you to forget about using that cotter pin. So that's what we use on the shift linkage. Well, that's all there is to it. You may come to a point of exasperation, but it can be done. It's nice to have a second set of hands, and we did it. So we're going to let it set up for several days before we put oil in it and take it out and try it. And there it is. Bought in 1983. It's 2022 now, and hopefully it lives again. We're going to let it set up for several days of silicone before we try it, to let it set well before the oil goes in. Then we'll take it out and try it in the water.